How do we remain operational when bad things happen that are beyond our control? Many business leaders are asking this question in the wake of the CrowdStrike outage that impacted almost every business in the world and affected millions of individuals. I'm Ian Romero from K3 Technology, and in this episode of Cover Your Assets, we break it down into terms everyone can understand and prepare you, the business leader, to not only ask the right questions of your technology team, but to spark meaningful conversations within your business leadership. I'm joined by James Abercrombie from Acronis and Matt Lee from PAX 8 for this discussion around incident planning, disaster recovery, business continuity, crumbling bridges, and even a Lindsey Lohan analogy. Enjoy. Hey, what's going on, everyone? So today we have James Abercrombie, technology evangelist at Acronis. We also have Matt Lee, senior director of security and compliance for PAX 8. Thank you guys so much for joining today. You guys both have a ton of experience in the industry. I think we're going to get a lot of value for the listeners today. Um, Talking about what happened at CrowdStrike, although not so much on that, but more so on business continuity and disaster recovery. What businesses can do to kind of prepare for something like this to happen within their organization. So I do want to kind of very quickly recap what happened at CrowdStrike. So I think kind of the watered down version, that update got applied, got pushed out to all of their nodes, crashed a bunch of Windows systems. The crash was not something that you could just fix remotely, push out a script and fix it because Windows was no longer booting, right? So
Right.
a lot of these organizations had to go out, get boots on the ground to actually fix the issue. I was traveling on Friday, so that wasn't fun. Obviously, affected all of the airlines. I actually got lucky on Friday, but then my flight back Sunday that got delayed. I think I got back home about 2 o'clock in the morning on Monday, so that was awesome. Not sure how you guys fared.
I
Oh
Um,
was
man.
lucky. I was at home. I just got phone calls from everybody that I knew telling me that they couldn't do, whatever they wanted to do on the internet. And
Yeah.
I said, "Well, reboot."
right.
Oh, that's not nice. Irony added. I will say for me, walked out of it pretty well in the sense that I was driving at the time, and so no real reliance on that. But I will say, other than the first thing I have to say, which is the beard density on this podcast is extreme right now, bro. Like it's extreme. I digress. But I sat there Friday and I actually broke down and started crying. And like I was sitting at my desk at home. I was actually in my own studio, and I started crying. I couldn't stop, and it was because we're at this state in our lives right now in technology, right? Like we're at this state where the level of resiliency, the level of operations, continuity of operations, COOP, DR, extensibilities, and even just the reliance on a single giant point of failure, um, it just got to a point where I realized that we as United States citizens and even as global citizens don't prepare for the worst case scenario, right? We plan for the perfect events. We have this positive outcome bias, and it's great. We need a positive outcome bias. We need to believe in the things we're doing. But the point being is that we take that to extreme and say, well, I don't need to plan for that, right? And to put this into reality, what happened in CrowdStrike? Like imagine every machine went down, and you have 20,000 machines out in your organization, and of that, there's 30 machines that you need to know are the most important machines in your organization. Let's say it's 30 of them. And you've got to either have a plan ahead of time that allows you to say, all right, I need 12 people on this. They're going to get these 30 back up. Then we're going to start extensibilities of ring 2. And then we're going to get into ring 3. And that'll allow us to make continuity of operations in this many days based on this kind of outcome, right? That kind of capability, that thought doesn't exist. People don't do that, which means instead you're picking through 20,000 machines while everybody's screaming, while every person in that 20,000 holding machines that can't work, that just care about your clients, that just care about getting things done, that just want to deliver success every day like we do, right? They're sitting there waiting, doing nothing. They're calling in. And instead of you having a plan, you now are reacting. And even worse, you're reacting to decades of tech debt, right? A lot of you small businesses out there that are listening to this probably have said, I need to get all 10 years out of this to make sure I get my return on investment. You're not changing anything till, unfortunately, the world changed around you, right? And we're in this stage where that cataclysm, I just broke down, y'all. I don't know about y'all, but that's how I fared. I didn't fare well.
yeah.
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 Yeah,
And I think, and that's something that kind of hit me actually Sunday whenever I went to a ticketing agent for American Airlines. And the ticketing agent I went to, she looked just completely worn
Just
down.
dying. Yeah.
emotionally dead pretty much, you know. And I think that's something that maybe organizations don't think so much about when something like this happens. It's not just a matter of, hey, how do we get our revenue back up? But
Yeah. It's
what
your
kind of,
people.
what kind of toll is this taking on your employees?
Oh.
What kind of residual effects are you going to have from that?
In fact, Ian, you said this. I made a post on Friday morning when I was going through this, and it was just a picture of a Starbucks sign. And on the Starbucks sign, they had a little piece of paper that wrote, "Sorry, we are down due to network issues," which I knew was machines that wouldn't come up. It wasn't network issues in that regard, right? And I put this post up, and I just said two things. One, I said, have some empathy for your service providers today. Understand that they just care. They want to get you back up. And believe it or not, we care about our companies that we support. We care about you as a small to mid-sized business that we're helping support. We care. And so we're trying to get it done. Limited resources, unlimited demand, massive amounts of work. And so I just said, please have some compassion. And the second thing I said is, by God, do not go do ambulance chasing and try to win business because of people's pain, right? Like just that two things. How many views do you think I have right now? This is only 4 or 5 days later. How many views do you think I have from from Friday's post?
Probably like 2,000.
No, bro. No.
How many?
I have 170,000 interactions with that post
Wow.
in that time frame. And what I'm getting at is that is how global, universal, and endemic this problem is. So to set the stage, Ian, for what you wanted to talk about, and James, it is really this lack of planning. I don't want to focus on the CrowdStrike event. I want to focus on how do we make decisions that allow us to be prepared to take the worst case scenario and make it less worst case scenario. Because the CrowdStrike event is a 1% event. I'll go out there and say it, that the people did the right things. They had testing in place. It couldn't have tested for the thing they tested for, and it's a 1% event. But guess what? 1% event happens. That's why they're called 1% events. They happen. And so how do you plan for them? How do you anticipate that when your whole body tells you it'll never happen to me? Right? Like that's the challenge. So anyways, I'll shut up.
I feel like we're at the point where, folks need to realize that it will happen to them.
Right. Something.
Absolutely.
It's no longer, and I was talking to my friend about this the other day. It's no longer that, it's not if, but when, it really is when.
It's
When.
when and how often and how resilient,
Yeah.
how well do you recover from it compared to your competitor and those
And not
things,
just
right?
when, but like what assets of your life is it going to affect? Obviously, it's
Right.
going to affect business. It's going to affect the people involved. But when we're talking about, say, like going to the grocery store or flying, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge downside to not having that incident response and plan in place. But as you said, Matt, it's okay to know, oh, I need to recover this system. That's not really incident response planning, right?
Right,
Knowing
right.
exactly who's going to do this, and if that person's not available, who's going to be doing it, and then what steps do they need to be taking,
What's
and in
the
what
what's
order.
the timeline? How
Uh-huh.
long? What kind of expectations can I set with my people? What are my communications that need to happen around this that people are not in chaos and wondering, do I send my people home? How do they work? What's the next steps? Am I paying them? How am I going to fund that? Like just all the things, right, that are part of that you either get the luxury of making in a vacuum and still maybe being wrong in a very pristine and perfect mindset, or, oh my God. And I just don't like making those decisions in the oh my God moment. I mean, there will be
No
some.
decision should be made in the oh my God moment.
Nothing good is going to come out of that.
No.
But and you hit on something, Matt. Just thinking about resiliency, and I think so. One of the numbers I pulled up, and I have to look at my notes because I don't remember them. So I just started seeing numbers today on basically the cost of this CrowdStrike
The
event.
$5 billion estimate
$5.4
today from
billion
Traverse.
just to Fortune 500 companies.
That's
That's
it.
not
Just to
taking
that.
into
Not even trickle
consideration
down.
the
Yeah,
smaller
yeah, yeah.
companies. I did a little research, and you might have better estimates on this. Kind of the most accurate number I felt like I could find in 2023, ransomware cost businesses an estimated $1 billion. So this one event
Yeah.
caused 5 times the damage, and it was not a malicious attack. So I think something I'd like to maybe dig into a little bit is what risk should organizations be thinking about outside of malicious attacks and ransomware? Because I think, at least for me, I feel like as soon as I sit down and talk to a business owner about risk, that's where their mind immediately goes. How do we keep the bad actors out? How do we make sure we don't get spoofed in emails? It's related to more malicious behaviors. They're not thinking so much about some of the basics that you're so, familiar with.
I want to add to this real quick because I don't want to dig deep in this because I don't want to bore a lot of the SMBs and people that are here. But I think there's some that's in your control, there's some that's in your influence, and there's some that is completely out of your control. right? And what I mean by that is what's in your control? The ability to plan, the ability to tabletop, the ability to think about impacts. And to your point, they're not all cyber. They can be the systems down. We talked before the show. It could be a hurricane. That could be a tornado. That could be all kinds of things. Supply chain challenges, human challenges, pandemics, let's say. Things of that nature are all things that can impact our business that force us to think about resiliency. And those are in our control. There's some things that are in our influence. And this actually speaks directly to the CrowdStrike situation today. And what I mean by that is the things in our influence, and this is my theory. I have a theory called the middle theory. And it basically is a restatement of capitalism that says a product never rises much above or falls very much below the maturity of the consuming entity in mass. Meaning, if everyone's extremely mature and demands better, then things have to get better or capitalism does not support it. But if things are not there, then it doesn't. And that's where we are in software today, ladies and gentlemen. People have built software that if they did this with a bridge, you would see the crumbling, you'd see the concrete, and eventually you'd see some bloke fall through the bridge, right? In our world, you never see anybody fall through the bridge until this $5 billion example and a few others before it, right? But the point is that the infrastructure we live on is never incentivized to be better. People don't hold companies accountable to how many CVEs they have. They don't hold people accountable to the problems and the failures. There's just no demand in marketing and capitalism, in the market of capitalism today that fixes this yet because the consumer maturity is too low. I say all that to say, what can you do in SMB? Listen to your MSPs when they tell you that the software is not mature enough or when they tell you there are problems. And I'm not saying this specific to CrowdStrike. I don't find fault directly in them. I am saying that the entire industry, when it's faced with a choice of, I have limited resources to code this platform, and I have a demand for this new feature from lots of people, and they'll buy it when I make it, or I have this bug that needs to be addressed, which one wins when the demand is only for features and not quality? It is always the features. And there's some degree of government that can step in for this. You've seen it in the automobile industry. You've seen it in almost every regulated industry. And there's some degree, I think, that it'll solve that. But your influence as an end SMB is really on just voting with your dollars, buying with those things, taking the advice from the people that are your professionals in your lives. And then there's the what you can't control. And that is genuinely just how shitty our world is around the tech that we live on and walk on every day. We are walking on crumbling bridges. Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, which is our cybersecurity agency in the United States, on Friday put out a post that I very much resonated with that said, we do not have a cybersecurity problem in this country. We have a software quality problem in this country. And I think she's on to something. I'm being a little hyperbolous. We do have a cybersecurity problem. But I believe it's co-tangential to that. So that's my piece on this that I'll say around this, and then digging into DR, we can continue down that path. But I just want to set people, the only thing you can control is that. It is what systems do I have, how important are they, what are the reliances, and could you have planned for a CrowdStrike-like event taking out BitLocker keys and having to restore machines? No, you probably would not have landed on that.
No.
But you could land on which systems need to be up. What things support my business making money? What can wait 30 days? What?
We lose them?
Yeah, I think we lost Matt.
And you can empower an Ian to make those decisions. All right, sorry about that. A little snafu there.
But I think you're right, Matt. I mean, in the sense of, things that you cannot control, right? No sysadmin had control over this. Nobody understood that this could happen. I mean, usually, there's no issue with rolling something like this out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen a couple of these 1% events in the last year. I mean, if you think about even with some popular other software called Screen Connect, they had a trailing backslash, and that was not testable by automated testing platforms. Same thing with CrowdStrike. They addressed some memory that was not addressable, and therefore the system didn't detect it. And so when I say the whole quality has to get better, right now I can buy any car, almost any car, even made since about 1980 or so. And any car is going to have a very high degree of reliability, a high degree of crash testing capabilities, at least a level set minimum of what needs to be there. We're not there yet with technology. So you have to plan and say, how do we move forward? What are those things we need to move forward? Ian, when you're walking through this with a customer, I just have a question. How do you dig into getting into a DR plan? Like, what do you need to do? What are the things that need to be talked about? We've covered a couple of them, but what do you do?
I mean, for me, like step one is what systems that if they're down, you absolutely cannot do business. And that's kind of where it starts, right? And I think, going back to, we talked a little bit before we started this podcast about shared responsibility. And that's something I dig into a lot too. Especially we have a lot of engineering companies. We have some healthcare companies, and some of them use proprietary software that, some of it is SaaS. So we don't necessarily manage that or have as much
Yeah.
control as we do over things that might be hosted on their servers. So it's really kind of breaking out, number one, what vendors are kind of responsible for helping get this back up and running. What SLAs do they have
And
attached
what
to it?
parts are they responsible for, right? Like
Exactly.
that
What parts?
specificity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also, do you have an application champion? If it's something that we don't necessarily
Amen.
manage, do you have an application champion internally that we can kind of lean on to help get us to the right people and help figure
Yeah.
out how to get you through this, right? But yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely step one is what is absolutely critical. Like, what will cause you to stop bringing in revenue, possibly give you a bad reputation if it's down for a certain amount of time, and how long can it be down for? If it's down for one day, is that a huge deal?
Yeah.
For 1 hour, is that a huge deal? And that kind of helps drive, what do we need to kind of put in here to safeguard against that and potentially put redundant systems in place and things of that nature.
Yeah. Where possible, right? And I want to key in on something you said. James, I guess unless you have something you want burning to say real quick, I don't want to cut
No,
you
you're
off
good,
there.
my man. You're good.
So when you think about shared responsibility, it's something great that I like to talk to clients about in this as a way to set this example and partners. If you think about patching, right? Something simple that most customers have at least heard from their MSP, you need to patch, you need to update, things of that nature, right? Well, when you talk about shared responsibility, instead of it being my MSP patches for me, that's not how this works. That's not correct. That's not how the responsibility actually lies. In fact, the MSP is going to be the one who ultimately responsibly patches it. They're going to be the ones bringing the system. They're going to be the ones that actually do the patching. But you as a customer have to be the one to approve patch windows
Mm-hmm.
and be there to say, yeah, if it's a 10, you can patch right now. I don't care about business operations. And you have to make that decision, right? But also at the same time, from a shared responsibility, you as the customer are ultimately accountable. I'm not. If I don't patch and ultimately and it fails because you left a machine off, you're accountable. And even if
Yep.
I do patch and I fail, you're ultimately accountable. It's your business that gets pwned, not mine. Now, you might have to sue and there's iterations and things there, but ultimately, it's a partnership. And shared responsibility speaks towards this part's mine, this part's yours. The other great thing about it is you can grade on that line, right? Ian, you can say, hey, listen, my system was an A. We patched every system that was online. We did it within the time windows and the SLAs we said. We got everything there. Great. But you guys as a client have left off 72% of your machines at the time that we needed patch windows, and Bobby calls in and gets mad every time he's got to reboot. And so you guys get a C plus. You can now grade along those lines in that understanding, right? And so I do love the concept of just shared responsibility in general, of hashing out who's doing what here, y'all.
Yeah.
Right? And even back to that patching example, you as the client, if you don't pay for the patch updates, let's say Cisco SmartNet, for example, is a great example in the past, I can't patch it. No matter what you want to do, I can't patch it. If you won't upgrade beyond Server 2008, 8R2, 12R2, whatever it may be that you're in, that's not licensable, or I guess 12R2 is still supported. But the point is, as those support ends, I can't patch it. There's nothing I can do to be magic to patch it if you won't get rid of your Windows 3.1. I'm looking at you, American Airlines, or whoever
So,
it is.
Matt, I mean, that really comes down to the agreement that's made between the service provider and the customer and the client,
Yeah.
right? And I believe that if there is a bit that the client's refusing to ascertain to say, there's a certain area of protection that I don't need from you, Mr. MSP,
Yeah.
there's a reason, and it's either cost or they've got a homegrown solution. Hopefully it's cost and not homegrown solution.
I would say it's
Homegrown
likely
solution.
not the latter because I haven't seen that work out super well.
It never worked out well. And I mean, that's where you've got like large enterprises using like
Yeah.
old systems for one
Oh.
piece of equipment. And,
Oh,
that's where the
gosh.
gap in coverage comes. And that
Yep.
gap in coverage needs to be discussed, right?
Yeah.
The incident
At least to
response
be
plan,
aware of it, right? To at
100%.
least know where you sit.
Because
Yeah.
that's no longer on you, right? And if that's
Right.
where the failure occurs, then they need to know that that's really on them. They need to have that kind of covered. And to Ian's point, like, do they have an application champion? Do they have somebody who's
Amen.
going to be able to do this? No longer do you have an IT staff on site at every location. Who you got a SQL admin, an Exchange admin, you got
Yeah.
your DB. Like now you're outsourcing it. So if you're not going to take full responsibility for what it is that this MSP has recommended, if you're not going to take on all of the options that they've presented to you to safeguard your systems, you're ultimately responsible for the areas that you did not take on, right?
Yeah. Well, and so, at K3, I've been in the process of updating our MSA and MSP agreement. We're about 7 years old now, and when I came in, one of the first things I did was kind of realign our base package to the CIS controls, mostly focusing on implementation group one. But to be honest, the sales proposal and sales agreement itself was very salesy. It was not,
Yeah.
it didn't really spell out, hey, here's what we do. It was just kind of like, hey, here's patch management. Here's what it is, and here's why it's important. But it didn't really specifically state things like, here's the pieces you're responsible for. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
But we can only do
Nobody
this if
did.
we do X, Y, and
Nobody
Z.
did.
So that's kind of what
Yeah.
I'm doing now.
That's awesome.
And as I kind of started putting together the list of exclusions and the client responsibilities, the thought has popped in my head that like, man, this is going to raise a lot of questions on clients. But at the same time, that's I think it's really going to be an educational opportunity for our clients and for new opportunities, because there is that piece that they really need to understand that we're going to do everything we can to deploy these services and deliver these services to you. But there's certain things that you have to do for us to be able to do that. And I think I think a lot of businesses might tend to look at those types of agreements as MSPs potentially trying to say, I don't want to be responsible for that ultimately. And it's more along the lines, in my opinion, of saying, no, we want to help you with this. We want to be, at least partially be responsible for this. There's certain things we need you to do for us to be able to do that.
And that's the point, right? Like, I can't be you. As a provider, I can't be you as a business. I'm not. You're you. I'm not you. And there's certain things that in the business need to be done by someone in the business. There's certain understandings, certain complexities, certain context. And what I mean is, in cybersecurity specifically, it's a team sport, right? I can't go out there and say I'll protect everything if I don't know what all you have. And you and I were talking about this before the show, of asset inventory. This understanding of, at the very basic level, I need to know what tools you're using, what systems you're using, what things you're actually allowing to happen. Right? I mean, most failures in CIS come from a failure in 1.1, which is an asset inventory, which is what systems am I using? Well, when you think about that as a customer, if you're allowing your people to use home machines, I need to know it. If you're having people work from the machine only at corporate, I need to know it. If they're using their cell phones, I need to know it. If you add in that new sweet little Sonos player, probably need to know it. If you're adding in something on the network, I need to know it. If you're right, that's something saying, well, you can protect me. Not if you Lindsey Lohan me and slip out the back door for the bodyguards and go get drunk. I can't protect you as a bodyguard if I get Lindsey Lohan, right? Like, it's just not going to happen. Anyways.
Master wordsmith over there, man.
I try.
So I guess while we're on the topic of shared responsibility, I think that would be a good segue to talk about disaster recovery plans versus business continuity plans.
Sure.
I'm not sure which one of you wants to take that first, but I think it'd be good to maybe educate a little bit on what the difference is between those two things.
James, this is your world, buddy.
Yeah, so I can give my feedback. So, I mean, business continuity versus disaster recovery. I mean, business continuity is going to go much further, right? It's going to be over-encompassing, and that's going to include your disaster recovery, right? You have to plan for the business. So kind of what Matt mentioned earlier, right? Who's going to do what? How long is it going to take? What's the time allotted? What's the time frame? Really looking at what the cost is going to be associated with that. That's going to get your clients, right? That's going to get them to implement the services, the solutions that you offer. Because ultimately, right, disaster recovery, all right, first off, backup's only as good as what you can recover from it, right? So making sure that you have tested this is huge. And then also making sure that you have rollback plans, available. I think that's the only way that people really would have been able to kind of make this a little bit more quick of a remediation process. I mean, people had to reboot into safe mode, simply, roll back to previous known good, something along those lines.
Yeah.
But
delete a file, and then the problem was they had to get past the BitLocker key, and there's just, it was hairy. But yeah.
So ultimately, when you're implementing something like disk encryption, right? That's adding a level of complexity that you need to also plan for,
and you have to have it. Yeah, but you do need to understand it. And sometimes I think, in my mind, just to add color to this too, disaster recovery is getting up from a single incident, single moment, back to a state that's restorable. Continuity of operations, in my mind, speaks towards, or COOP, or whichever way you want to look at it as continuity plans, is I can't get that back up. What is next? Yep. How do I continue operating this business? How do I move forward? What are my pivots? And so in my mind, COOP or continuity starts to get into how do we continue to make decisions when large, bad, hard decisions need to be made to continue this business forward? How do we move forward? Like, if I have this ash plant down, does my coop plan say that I'm going to buy time in this other ash plant from somebody for concrete mixing? Does my continuity plan say that I'm going to have insurability that helps me offset that cost so that I can continue forward? Does my continuity plan say that maybe we're going to treat our assets like cattle and we're going to wipe and reload them, and that's already set up that way, and we've planned for that, and we need to, like, DR, to my point, deals with a situational reaction. Coop deals with a longer situational reaction of, do we survive?
Yeah, it's
How
like
do we survive?
the
Right?
wireframe tree is
Yeah.
the business continuity, like you
Yeah.
said. And most people only plan for, fail back one, right?
Right.
If this doesn't
Right.
work, how do I
Yeah.
do it? Well, what happens when your backup doesn't work? What happens when
Yeah.
your
Do you
your actual
rebuild? Are you
backup
going to
doesn't
start
go anywhere?
new? Are you going to
Yep.
take this as an operational reason to start a new platform that doesn't have some of those challenges? Like, what does your coop say you're going to do? What does that continuity of that operation say? And what I'm really getting at is just an extenuation of what we said about DR planning. Don't do it when you're already in duress. Don't do it when
Breathe.
you're already losing. Go ahead and have it. Do it somewhere where it's safe to fail, right? Where you can go and say, let's tabletop this and see what we do, and go, oh, that sucked. We learned a lot. Great. Guess what? You learned a lot. Nobody had to lose a leg, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's one of those type of situations. And so I think for me, I guess the biggest takeaway I'd want anybody listening to this to take today is, go plan while it doesn't cost you something. Go be imaginative. In fact, this is what AI is the best at, right?
Mhm.
AI in its current state and LLMs today are non-deterministic. In fact, they're probabilistic, right? And non-deterministic means that they don't really come to a real conclusion. But you know what they're great at? Come up with lots of creative things. They're very good at that. What if you use it as a way to say, hey, AI, simulate me a failure in my business today around this, and then walk through it as a tabletop and come up with those type of scenarios? Or what if this happened? Maybe if something happened that caused half of my machines to not be able to function and I couldn't deal with them when they were offline. That wouldn't say the word CrowdStrike, but it would deal with a number of ways that could play out,
Yeah.
right? And so, the thing I'd take away from this is, go tabletop, go do those exercises. Your MSP may charge you to do it, but they're worth doing, right? They are worth getting into and breaking down and doing that disaster planning in a way that you're testing your own disaster plans through gamification, through talking about it and planning it out and saying what would happen. You won't be right. You won't even be 90% right. But
That's
you will
okay.
be enough to get where you need to go and learn the muscle memory. All right.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I think it's just like going to the gym and working out. You might not be able to bench press 2 plates today, but if you keep going back, you'll get to that eventually. I think something else I would hit on too is making sure that a business is kind of agreeing on RTOs and RPOs, kind of relative to that disaster recovery plan.
And
when they're
just so
talking.
everybody knows, restore time objectives
Yep.
and restore point objectives. Time meaning how long is it going to take me to get back up? And point is, how many times a day are you backing up, my man? When can I go back to? How much data do I lose, right? So RTO is time to restore. RPO is what point am I trying to get back to in time?
Yeah, and most MSPs, ourselves included, they kind of have a standard that when you sign up for the DR plan, hey,
We
this is
back
what
up
we do.
twice a day. We do whatever it
Exactly.
is, once a day, whatever the answer is. Yeah.
But it's important to understand what that is and perhaps request that that's increased or decreased based on your needs. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of considerations that go along with that. But one point I do want to make, we work with a lot of architecture companies, a lot of engineering firms, a lot of creative agencies. So, let's just say that one of those companies loses a week of work. They're
Yeah.
losing a lot more than just not being able to work right then and there. They're also having to go back and recreate all of the work from that
Oh,
past
yeah.
week if they can't restore it. And I would think it's the same for a lot of other industries out there as well.
And nobody ever creates data problems by having to go back and recreate moments in time as if they were happening right now. Never. That doesn't
Never.
occur. I digress.
Oh man, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think the ultimate takeaway is that you really have to test,
Yes.
and I think what you said, Matt, utilizing AI to kind of tabletop it, what a great idea. That this is
I get one a
a
day.
fantastic use of AI, and I've talked to a couple businesses that actually do something like this, like a role play where they do like a choose your own adventure on your
Yeah.
cybersecurity breach, and if you haven't done something like that, I strongly encourage you to do so. You shouldn't silo this. You need to get the whole team involved because ultimately it's, everybody's responsibility to make sure that you're safeguarded. Make sure that, the people are not clicking on unfortunate links in their emails or making sure that people have their systems on when they need to be backed up or patched.
Amen.
But making sure that,
Awareness, responsibility,
awareness.
accountability, right?
Hmm.
And actually touching back to your conversation on shared responsibility too, I do think that the simple way of just your responsibility, my responsibility, also doesn't really cover it. I do believe that RACI, R-A-C-I, should be the method that's used, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Meaning, and who's responsible? Like, who's going to do the action? Who's going to actually wield that sword and patch that machine? That might be Ian. Who's accountable? Ultimately, probably going to be the client. Now, Ian may have accountability to his software functioning and those things, but the governance rests with the owner, right? What about consulted? Maybe we need to talk to each of your stakeholders and ask which systems are most important and which ones need to come back up and what kind of restore point objective, what kind of restore time objective, right? And so then you get into informed. Everybody else that we just tell, hey, I'm patching, it's going to be down, right? And so when you start getting into it, in my mind, or I guess backing up or whatever it might be in this instance. But the point being is RACI matrices allow you to be way more granular in what pieces you need to be responsible for and what types of responsibilities you're going to own in that kind of shared responsibility matrix.
And that
Yeah,
should be discussed for sure.
yeah, that's a really good point. And something I didn't think about when you asked the question about how do we go through creating a DR plan earlier is carving out the roles and responsibilities.
Amen.
And if you don't have that kind of stated right at the beginning, there's really no way to kind of create a RACI chart because then you don't have any of those roles assigned. I mean, I guess you could create it, but if you don't happen to be anybody assigned to those roles, then nobody
Doesn't help, does it? Yeah,
and thinking about what should the business be thinking about that they're ultimately going to be responsible for. I think communications is a huge one.
and
And
governance.
making sure you have the right person that's going to communicate what's going on to the end users, what's going on to the clients. And
Yeah.
that could be two different people. You could have
Yeah,
somebody
two
for
different
internal.
personas.
Yeah. So that is a really important point to the DR plans as well. I think we're 30 minutes in already. One other thing I did want to kind of touch on a little bit. Nobody expected, I don't think anybody had on their 2024 bingo card that CrowdStrike was going to take down half of the world's infrastructure.
Could have made billions on a put. Yeah, no, it did not.
That said, I mean, what due diligence? So I guess let me preface this by saying
Yeah.
I've had a couple of clients come to me and say, hey, this was kind of one of my concerns about letting you deploy agents into our environment. Something like this could happen. Not that we didn't have CrowdStrike, but
Yeah,
obviously
I understand.
CrowdStrike has brought that.
But using it as
back to life.
analogous mention, right?
Exactly. So I guess, in your opinion, what kind of due diligence should the service provider do on the vendors that they utilize for detection and response, remote management, patch management? And then, I think, to an extent, businesses shouldn't necessarily just take that at face value. Like, hey, my MSP said this is good, so I think it's good. But what should the businesses really be doing in terms of due diligence outside of just trusting their MSP?
Oh, gotcha. I think this wouldn't happen this way in any other scenario. We don't often leave it on the lowest common denominator to decide whether they're going to die by their own hand. I know we live caveat emptor, and we do live in a world where it is let the buyer beware. But I will also say that in almost every other scenario, I don't get to hang power lines myself. I don't get to, do things that could kill me. In fact, even my hammer when I go to Home Depot has a warning that says, don't hit yourself in the head, stupid. So I think, what should the due care be? I actually would say the due care is in the MSP themselves. I actually did a speech called Nobody Gives a Blank About Fazio, and blank was definitely a curse word. And it was to 120 Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 CISOs. And I was explaining that Fazio Mechanical Services was the small business that took down Target. And my argument was 15 years later, nobody remembers Fazio, but they remember Target, right? And so I was giving an advocation to these enterprise CISOs the same way I'd give to you as a client, as a small to mid-sized business listening to this. And it is, don't ask these hundreds of detailed security questions to try to get to due care and due diligence. They're just going to lie to you. It's not going to help. They're going to say yes when they should have said no. What you should do instead is ask 5 or so open-ended questions from the MSP. And that's why I'll turn this back to you as a client, as the MSP. And those were, how do you deal with asset inventory for yourself? How do you deal with asset inventory for the small to mid-sized business that's about to buy from Target or be Target's HVAC vendor? How do you deal with this? How do you deal with, How do you deal with asset management? How do you deal with patch management? How do you deal with identity management? How do you deal with incident response? And how do you deal with penetration testing? If you can speak towards those things in the way that you can answer those, and I can take that as an eloquent answer and know that you know what you're talking about, I just kind of have to leave it to that. And I think the argument is that if you're with someone mature enough in a market where we all suck, I'll say this here, we all suck. Your software vendor sucks, your backup provider sucks, you suck, your technology sucks, my technology sucks, we all suck. And the reason is we're early in the stage of it. I do a talk where I talk about technology in humans over the measurable life, right? All the way from hammers to, right? And the point is that if you look at the automobile industry, in the beginning, the deaths per billion miles traveled was massive. Even though there weren't many cars in the early 1900s, the death per billion miles was really high. And what ended up happening is it stayed that way for like 60 years. Nobody cared. We weren't at a point where the global conscious was impacted enough that we changed. But in 1965, Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed. And he posited that the maturity of the consumer was so low that the auto industry was always just reacting to consumer demand and not considering greater good and the impact in consumer safety. And in 1966, the National Motor Vehicle Traffic Safety Act was passed, which formed NHTSA, which allowed them to say brake lights must be on the left and right, and they must be this bright, and the cars must have they addressed all those concerns in that way because of that maturing market, and the deaths per billion miles traveled dropped precipitously and stayed at a level we're accountable and okay with. It didn't go to zero. We let people die. That's unfortunate, but we understand consumer choice. And the point is, we're just at that stage of trying to get to that consumer choice. I'm not saying CrowdStrike failed here. In fact, I won't cast any shade on them. I think we all suck. I think the point is that we haven't demanded this as consumer bases yet. So what can you do as a consumer? Don't get rid of EDR. In fact, CrowdStrike has probably saved millions and billions more than what would have. Because your fact earlier, Ian, of saying there was only 1 billion in cyber threat, it's because we probably stopped 90 billion in it from the actions of the CrowdStrikes and the Acronises and the blank here, right? And so my point is just this argument of saying greater good still dictates you must do these things. Long term, we can't suck forever, right? And so as an industry, demand better, hire the MSPs that are out here educating, that are doing those things that you know are asking those questions, and make sure they give you a real human answer of why are you still using CDR? Well, they're the best out there right now. They solve these problems, and we know the risk is there. But you know what we ought to do? We ought to do some disaster planning. We ought to understand that everything's ephemeral, and at some point things can go away. How do we deal with it? What's your escape plan? When is it too long? Are you going to insure that? Do you have business revenue loss? These are the things that are going to matter. So my take is that we just have to be patient and demand more. But making knee-jerk reactions because of something that came to your conscious, if you paid attention enough, you'd be making knee-jerk reactions every single day. And I think the point is this is what's in our focus today. But if you remember back, Ian, there was a massive SSO outage from Microsoft. And everybody said, oh my God, all our eggs in one basket. Yep, we need to demand better, y'all. That's where we're at. We have to demand better. And I think we are all too often only called to the sticky, shiny things in front of us. But in reality, we're all better than we were 10 years ago, and we will continue to be better than we are in 10 years from now. So have faith, put your head down, keep fighting the good fight, and do some damn planning, and beat your competitor. Like that's my argument.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, really, the I can't emphasize more on the asset management, right?
Yeah,
if you don't understand what all is within your inventory, what all has access to your network, what all is public, what's private, then your MSP is at a loss. They don't understand exactly what they need to do, and that ultimately, I believe, falls on the client, right? And it needs to be discussed. It needs to be shown where these gaps can truly cause havoc, right? Especially with all the Internet of Things, right? As you mentioned earlier, Sonos speaker, right? Or something along those lines. It's
my
just
new temperature sensor or whatever.
something minute that it's like, oh, it's a nice to have, but is it safeguarded?
And going back to your shiny points, if you knew that I could use that IoT device to create what's called an LLM&R poisoning, which allows me to take over devices, DNS, and send them to malicious places that I want to, you would go, oh my God, we need to knee-jerk react to this. But the reality is just having a better plan, understanding a surface area. And if you can't understand it as a small business, I don't blame you. You can't. That's why you have people
why you get an
focus on
MSP.
it.
Yeah, that's why you get the MSP.
So if there's, I'm going to end with this question, and I think you guys both kind of answered this in so many
we
ways.
were separated at birth. James and I were, I think, started in the same initial embryo, potentially.
So if there's one thing that you would advise a business to do to raise their maturity level and raise their resiliency against events like this, what would it be? And I'll let each of you answer that one.
You go, James.
I think it's, again, comes down to planning, and not siloing that planning, right? Again, not one person will ever know the answer to everything. It's going to be
Yeah.
a collaboration, a cooperation amongst people to understand where, and again, roles, what roles do they play? How do they impact, each one of these areas that, could potentially impact their business. So understanding that the MSP is there to provide a value, but that they are ultimately still responsible for
Yeah.
the posture, right?
Yep.
I mean, you cannot put security systems on all your doors and not the back
Right.
window that you
Oh,
leave
and then you
open.
don't set the alarm, and then you don't, right? Like those are the things. And that's my take on this, Ian. If I had to give advice, it would be this. Imagine you have a small to mid-sized business and you have a break room, okay? And Ian, you've made a decision that because of the great state of blank, you are not allowed to smoke inside your break room anymore. In fact, cigarettes are prohibited indoors. And you put up a sign that says no smoking in the break room. Now imagine after you've done that, you still allow people to smoke in the break room and you can smell it, you know they're still doing it. You have failed to govern. You have set a rule that no one followed. You have lessened your personal power. You have lessened your operational power. You have shown that you do not have control of your organization. My argument is a lot of the problems that live today are from a lack of governance. In fact, you see it come up in NIST CSF 2.0. You see it now come up in CIS 8.1. It's governance. So what can you do as a business owner? Actually do what James was saying and own this damn thing. It's yours. It's your decisions. It's how you're going to move. The second thing I'd add to that, though, is you definitely don't go, you know what, time to roll up my sleeves and let's get this lift pump in for the sewer system. I'm going to make this poop go out to the street. Got it. No, you hire a partner. You trust them. You get the project plan. You understand, and they make the poop leave and go out to the street. Like they're a plumber. That's what they do. Don't be the plumber. Don't go and try to do it yourself. There is no reason a small to mid-sized business should ever be doing this themselves. In my opinion, I'll stand behind it. You can go, in fact, look me up, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll fight you on it. You should not do this yourself. You should have a partner. You should have ways to discern if that partner's an idiot, and you should move forward with the governance that you're in charge and you're going to make that partner successful or not. If you say to your people, we're going to patch and we're going to deal with these things, and if we have this problem, we're going to go and do this, and if we're going to tabletop, we're going to be serious about it, you're the only person or persons that can get your company to do the things that are necessary to go down that path correctly. You're the only one. Right? Ian can't do that for you. He can't inject it for you. He can't make that happen. But he can definitely help you down that road and bring that expertise. And my point is like, if you're doing this, don't do it alone. And if you're doing this, do it. Like, do it. Make it happen. Participate. Be part of it. All right. I'm
Make it
off my soapbox.
continuous, right? It's not a set and forget type thing.
Amen.
Right?
Nor is your business.
Yeah.
Right? Like, think about, I had this concrete manufacturer. And they did concrete to pour roads, right? Because in a state that they don't do asphalt, it's all concrete, right? Because of the expansion joints. So the point is they were the biggest one in this state. And I started talking to them about their business, and I was trying to talk to them about their technology side of it. And I was like, tell me about your how you get concrete places. Like, how do you make money? He says, well, we have these giant jobs sometimes, and what we have to do is we own the ash plant, we own the concrete mixing, we own the trucks, we own the routes, we own the people pumping, we own the pouring, we do all of it. And so what we have to do is we have to get a truck every 30 minutes on site with the right mix, the right type of ash, the right type of stuff. I said, great, tell me what happens when something goes bad. Like an ash plant going down. He's like, yeah, we have another one we can rent from. We have people. Okay, what about trucks breaking? No, we built a shop. We understood that we had a shop. If we had a shop, we could do it. We have another dump truck too, and we actually have extra drivers. We have all these great. Why do you not apply those same things to your technical systems? Why do you not realize how important they are to the delivery of your world? And the reason is it's back to that middle theory. The maturity ain't there. It's really on how well Ian can convince you. And I think that point is as soon as the American consciousness starts thinking like they do their dump trucks about their information systems and the way they deliver things, we're just in a much better place, man. And I think that's what you can do the most is that.
Awesome. Man, I appreciate it, guys. There was a lot of really good nuggets of wisdom here for our listeners. Matt, where can people find you if they want to follow you?
I'm around. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Pretty much anywhere you see Cyber Matt Lee will be me. I think that's me on YouTube. I think that's me on Twitter. I think that's me on LinkedIn. So find me on Cyber Matt Lee. I also am part of PAX 8, right? PAX 8 lovingly sponsors my breakfast, lunches, and dinners to help me fight the good fight with you. And I do have a show I do with PAX 8 called The Game, where I go over very kinesthetic and nerdy topics that maybe the people listening to this may not find enjoyable, but maybe you do. But yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. What about you, James?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Normally at most of these community events, but recently just kind of keeping the head down, trying to learn from my MSP colleagues, what it is that's going to help them scale their business. So, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody tuning in. If any of this topic, piqued anybody's interest, if you want to talk more, reach out to me. I love to just have those conversations and see where I can bring value.
Even if it's just Ian's beard care tips,
Yeah,
right? That can be
exactly.
really important. You never
I'm
know.
here
It's
for
pretty
whatever
solid.
you need. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone.
Take care.
See y'all.